welcome to IT Nerd Zone. This is going to be a quick video on everything you need to know about the Cisco Access Server for your home lab. In this video, I'm going to cover configuring and securing a Cisco Access Server, and then we're going to look at some commands on using it. For this demonstration, here's the topology. I'm using a Cisco 2511 RJ Access Server with a BL50R transceiver to convert serial to RJ45 connection, and a couple of rollover cables that I built myself using some spare Cisco console cables I had. Now, it's pretty easy to build a rollover cable if you have an Ethernet cable crimper and a couple of RJ45 connectors. Now, here's the diagram that shows the cable connections. All you have to do is reverse the pinout on one end, so you have 1 to 8 pins on one end of the cable and 8 to 1 pins on the other end. In other words, pin 1 on one end of the cable goes to pin 8 on the other end of the cable. Alright, let's leave the cables alone for now and start configuring the access server. As you see, I'm using 3 routers and 3 switches as hosts that are directly connected to the access server using the rollover cable. And once we have successfully completed the configuration, we'll be able to console into any of these hosts that are connected using telnet. This really helps people who are preparing for their CCNA, CCNP, CCIE, or any Cisco certification exams and have their own home lab with multiple devices. This basically avoids physically switching console cables between the devices every time you need to configure them. So, as you guys see, I'm already consoled into my access server now. At first, I'll start with the basic commands that can be used on any Cisco networking devices. I will set the host name. In order to do that, I'll go to the config mode and then I'll type in host name followed by the name I want for my access server. That would be ITNZ, that stands for IT Nerd Zone, -AS stands for access server, and then I'll hit enter. And then I'll issue 2 other commands that I use on almost all my Cisco devices. The first command would be no IP domain lookup. The reason I use this command is by default when you enter a command in a user or enable mode, and if the router does not recognize the command, the router assumes that it is the host name of a device that you are trying to reach using telnet. Therefore, the router tries to resolve the unrecognized command into an IP address by doing an IP domain lookup. If no specific domain server has been configured on the router will issue a broadcast for the command to be translated into an IP address. Now, it can take several seconds for the router prompt to return while the router waits for a response to its DNS broadcast. But the no IP domain lookup command disables the DNS packets generated by the Cisco iOS software. So, IP packets carrying DNS requests or DNS responses for end users are not affected and will be routed correctly. And the second command that I would usually use is the login synchronous. This has to be done under the line console as well as on the telnet lines. So now I'm in config mode. I'll go to line console 0 and then type in login synchronous. And now the reason I use this command is when all the status messages are displayed, they display on the current line by default. This means that if you're in the middle of typing a command, status messages will show up wherever you're typing. Now, when you use logging synchronous, it causes all the router status messages to be displayed on a new line, and hence avoids any interruptions while you're in the middle of typing. And now we will look at securing the router by creating a couple of usernames with different privileges. I will create an admin account with privilege level 15, which allows the user to access the privilege exec mode directly as soon as the user logs in. In order to do that, I'll type in username. I'll call the user as admin with privilege 15. Password, I'll call it Cisco. And now that admin account is configured, I'll create another account for the local user, or like a regular user, who can access my access server and connect to all my host machines, like my routers and switches for labs or for testing. So I'll call this user as guest. I'll call it guest with privilege level 1. And I'll give the password as guest. So now privilege level 1 allows the user to only access the user exec mode. In this mode, you have access to some information about the router, such as status of interfaces. You can view routes in a routing table. However, you cannot make any changes or view the running configuration file, for example. Now, if you're looking at the running config, you can see the passwords are in clear text. That is not good. But you can encrypt all these passwords on any Cisco devices by issuing just one single command. And that has to be done on the config mode. Command would be service password-encryption. What it does is this encrypts all the passwords stored on this device. Now, if you go back to the running config, now you can clearly see all the passwords are encrypted. It's not a clear text passwords anymore. So this is another option for securing your Cisco device. Now the username and passwords are configured to log into this router. We will configure the telnet lines. I will go to line VTY024 and say login synchronous. As you see, I'm issuing this login synchronous command again under the telnet lines. Previously, we issued this command and under the console line. The next command that I'm going to use is login local. What this does, this basically enables the local user database that we created on this router to be used for authentication when you're logging in. Now the router is secured, we can go ahead and configure the access server part of it. I'll go to interface Ethernet 0. Set the IP address. I'll say IP address 10.179.30.10 is the subnet of 255.255.255.0. This is separate VLAN that I created on my network just for testing purposes. So if you guys have a separate network or any network that you're in that you want to connect this access server to, you will probably be using that IP address here. This would be the IP address that would connect to your network. And now I'm going to issue the no shut command and then exit. And now the line protocol for this interface is up. We will set the default gateway, and we can do it under the config mode. IP default gateway 10.179.30.254 and hit enter. So this is my default gateway for my network. Could be different for you guys. And since we're not using any routing protocols, what we're gonna do is we're gonna set a gateway of last resort on this router by creating a static route to the network. We can do that by using the IP route command. So I'll say IP route 0.0.0.0.0 and the subnet 0.0.0.0.0. Now use the exit interface as Ethernet 0 and the next hop address as my default gateway, which is 10.179.30.254. Hit enter. Now I'll go ahead and configure the loopback interface on this device. I'll go to interface loopback 0, say IP address 192.168.0.1 with a subnet of 255.255.255.0. Just so you guys know, this IP address can be any IP address that you want. This need not be any VLANs on your network, or it has nothing to do with any of your networks. So this is just a local loopback address on this access server. So I'm gonna say no shut and exit. So basically a loopback interface is a virtual interface that resides on a router. It is not connected to any other devices. Loopback interfaces are really very useful because they will never go down unless the entire router goes down. Now all the end devices that we connect to this access server uses loopback connections, and this makes a device think that it is connected to a network when it is really just connecting to a loopback address. Now the loopback interface is up, I will use the IP host command. What this command does is simply maps a name to an IP address. So I'll say IP host R1. I'm just choosing a random name for the first device connected to the first port on this access server. And I'm going to use the port number as 2001, followed by the IP address, which is our loopback IP address 192.168.0.1. This basically maps the host name R1 to the loopback address of 192.168.0.1 with the port number 2001. So we'll use the same command to map the rest of the end devices to the loopback address. So I'll say IP host R2 with a unique port number 2002, followed by the same loopback address 192.168.0.1. I'm going to follow the same syntax for rest of my devices. But this is where most people think they have completed the configuration, but we're not quite done yet. To show you guys what I mean, if you type R1 to connect to the first router that's connected to this access server, now you can see it does not connect to router 1. It says it's trying. It says trying R1 on 192.168.0.1 with port number 2001, but it returns back with an error message saying connection refused by remote host. Now, in order to make it work, we have to use two more commands in the async lines 1 to 16 that is connecting to the end devices. In order to do that, I would go to the config mode again and then say line 1 to 16 and then type in no exec. This command is used as a security measure again. This command will not allow a line to be activated by any traffic coming from the end devices like R1, R2, R3, or S1, S2, S3. This will ensure that any line of your terminal server will be set busy by a reverse telnet session. And the second command that we're going to use is transport input telnet. This command enables the telnet protocol to the end devices through these asynchronous lines from 1 to 16. You guys can also use one more command, which is exact timeout. I usually set it to 0 minutes followed by 0 seconds. What it does is it prevents telnet sessions on the async lines from timing out. So basically it never times out. So that is it for the configuration, guys. Also, it is possible that even after configuring everything right, you try connecting to the host and you sometimes get an error saying connection refused by the remote host. This can be easily fixed by issuing the clear line command on all the lines the hosts are connected to. In order to connect to the end devices, you can just type the device name, for example R1, and hit enter. Boom, there you are. You are connected to router 1. And now to get out of the connected router, all you have to do is use Control-Shift-6 followed by letter X, like X-ray. Again, just to remember, guys, this will only suspend the connection and will not disconnect it completely. So you can always resume the connection by typing resume or just R for resume, followed by the device name or the connection number. For example, I can say resume R1. And I'm on R1 right now. Now I can suspend the connection by typing Control-Shift-6 followed by letter X. And again, to connect, you can use just their device name, for example R2. Again, to exit is Control-Shift-6 and X. Now, as I said, to resume, you can also use the connection number. So if I type 2, it will connect to R2. There you go. Now, to check the connection number, if you guys are not sure what's the connection number for that particular host, you can use the show session command. Let's try that now. Once I'm back in the access server, I'll say show session. This displays information about your current telnet sessions, like your connection number, hosts, etc. Also, other show commands that can be handy are the show line command. Let's type in show line. This basically displays the status of a line. If you look at the first column here, letter I basically indicates this line is idle. If you see a star, that means this line is active. Now the TTY stands for actual line number. And this TYP here stands for type of line, which could be CTY for console, AUX for auxiliary, VTY for telnet, etc. And this letter A you guys see here indicates whether the autobaud is active or not. Autobaud is automatic baud rate detection. And this modem shows the type of modem signals configured for this line. like call in, call out, in out, so on and so forth. I'm not gonna go in details about this options, but these are the basic things you guys need to know. One other command I wanted to talk about is the show host command. Let's do show host. This basically shows the host name, shows the port number for that host name, the IP address it is using, etc. Now we know how to connect to a remote host and suspend a connection from the remote host and resume a connection to the remote host. And now we'll see how to disconnect the session that you're connected to. Once you're back in the Access server, you can just issue the disconnect command. So you'll just say disconnect followed by the device name. I'll say disconnect R1, hit enter, and confirm, hit enter. Boom. Now you're disconnected from R1. So if you try to resume R1, you can see it's not connected. So there is no established session to connect to R1. You can also disconnect a session using the connection number. You can say disconnect 2. So this basically disconnects your R2 session. Also, let's say you have a guest user logged into one of your routers. I'm gonna telnet and log in as guest with the guest password. As you see, guest has a privilege level 1. So as a privilege level 1 user, guest only gets access to the user exec mode. Now let's say user guest logs into R1. He is working on this router. On the other hand, I will open another telnet session, and I'm going to log in as admin with the admin username and password. Now, as a privilege 15 user, admin gets access to the privilege exec mode. Now, admin tries to connect to R1, but he cannot get in, and he gets a message saying trying 1 with so on and so forth IP address with this port number, but the connection is refused by the remote host. That is because the guest is already logged into the router and is using it. Now you have the option to disconnect the guest user's session by issuing the clear line command. So I would say clear line 1, confirm. Voila! You just disconnected the guest user's session to that router. Now you have that router for yourself. Also, the guest gets a message saying the connection to R1 closed by foreign host. That means that the guest did not disconnect the session. The session was disconnected by a foreign host, which is admin. That's pretty cool, isn't it? So that's it for the basics, guys. That should get you guys rolling. This also completes a brief tutorial on all you need to know about setting up a Cisco Access server for your home lab. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to comment below and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you once again for watching this video, guys, and I hope this has been informative. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and I will see you guys next time.